Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 13th of May of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. The most important, most interesting updates are coming from Russia, from Bryansk area. As you know, I believe you've heard that today the Russians during the day lost at least 4 aircraft units. They lost 2 helicopters Mi-8. The Russians lost 1 aircraft Su-34, another aircraft Su-35, and there were a lot of rumors, a lot of talks, a lot of discussions about the situation, and we can say the only thing that I agree with everybody, that the 13th of May is the tragic day for Russian Air Forces because they lost so many aircraft units. So let's discuss the situation in details, and I'll try to explain you what exactly did happen there during the day. So the situation, the story about Bryansk started not today, and this story is not over, is not finished. And these stories started a long time ago, a few months ago. If you remember, a few months ago, the Ukrainians sent their commandos and let's say under Russian flags, like Russian opposition flags, they crossed the border and they captured few villages in this area. Lubechin, as far as I remember, they captured, and another Sushane. These 2 villages were captured. 1 civilian was killed, 1 small boy was wounded, and so on. But after that, the Russian forces sent their police squads, and these forces, these Ukrainian commandos, were forced to step back and move back to the territory of Chernigov area and Sumy region as well. And that was not the only attack, not the only one attempt to cross the border. After that, the Ukrainians made a lot of waves to do this, and most of them were successful, because if you remember, during just the previous and these months, the Ukrainians managed to derail a lot of trains exactly in Bryansk area. At least 2 or 3 trains were derailed during the previous months. Furthermore, the Ukrainians managed to destroy and to mine the oil pipeline that were going from Russia in direction of Belarus. Also, the Ukrainians destroyed few energy facilities, constructions in the Bryansk area. So they did a lot of pain, they did a lot of bad things, and the Russians were trying to find a solution how to prevent this situation. And as I understand, the Russians don't have power, don't have enough of forces, or let's say in Bryansk area, to stop the Ukrainians' offensive and, let's say, commandos and reconnaissance operations. So for this purpose, but the Russians understand that they needed to do something, they need to solve this issue, because the damage, and they're losing reputation, they're losing the belief in mighty of Russian army and so on. So the first step that the Russians made was to send their own forces on the border and to try, let's say, to prevent and not to allow the Ukrainians to get very deep inside the territory of Russian Federation. But as we understand, these solutions haven't helped the Russians, so they start thinking more. As I understand, they continue thinking, and they made another solution. They took a decision to destroy the bridges, let's say, that are located along the border, which Ukrainians were using, let's say, to cross the rivers on the border with Russia and to enter the territory of Russian Federation. And for these purposes, the Russians were using Su-34 aircraft and Su-35 aircraft as the main aircraft, as a support aircraft. So you're never sending Su-34 a bomber like alone. You try to send also like an aircraft that their main goal is to support the bomber and something like this. And that was the Russians were sending these aircrafts, and their main job of these aircrafts was to destroy the bridges along the rivers. And if you remember, during the previous months, the Russians managed to destroy at least possibly few bridges, or at least to damage them. So the Ukrainians were lost possibilities to use those bridges. But as we understand now, that was exactly that the Ukrainians wanted the Russians to do. They wanted to force them to bring as close as possible their air forces to the border and to the territory of Ukraine. And this tactic that the Russians took a decision to use was working successfully, at least until today. And furthermore, but we heard that today the Russians lost not just the Su-34 and Su-35, they also lost 2 helicopters. So we will get them also closer to the border. So what is the job, what is the reason and of the purpose of those helicopters? You know that Su-34 is an aircraft bomber, and his main job to destroy the buildings, to destroy like fortifications, bridges on the ground. Su-35 main job is not to allow, let's say the Ukrainian MiG-29 to shut down the Russian Su-34. So his main job is to protect, let's say, Su-34, to fly in the vicinity of him and to attack the Ukrainian aircrafts if they take a decision to get closer. Meanwhile, the Su-34 is doing his job by bombing the bridges and so on. But the question is, what kind of system should protect Su-35? Because if Su-35 protects Su-34, who is going to protect Su-35? And now we are moving to helicopter Mi-8. So there was a very special helicopter Mi-8 that was destroyed today. He had some system, some technologies, that the main job of those technologies was to suppress enemies, let's say, radio signals. And this suppressing allows the Russians to cover their air forces from, let's say, Stingers, from, let's say, air defense system of the enemy, and something like this. So that was the main purpose of that helicopter. And the Russians were saying that these helicopters are able to cover the territory around the area of their work in the range of 150 kilometers to one and to another side. So imagine yourself, it's a very big square that is under protection of this system. So, but these helicopters usually works behind the air forces. So let's say the first one is, let's say, Su-35 somewhere here, then there goes Su-34, and behind them we can find the helicopters Mi-8 that are protecting these airplanes with these radio barriers or something like this. And today currently we have at least 2 versions, there are 2 camps that saying what did happen there. The first one is that as a result of, let's say, silent penetration, the Ukrainians managed to send and to cross the Russian border and to send scouts and commandos very deep inside the territory of Russian Federation. And let's say first Su-35 crossed the, let's say, get as close as possible to the border, then Su-34, and behind them there was 2 helicopters Mi-8, and they were right above the territory of those scouts who had Stingers. And those scouts, the Ukrainian scouts, took this as soon as they understand that everything goes according to their plan, they attacked those helicopters, the first attack, and they attacked the second helicopter. Some sources are saying that the second helicopter wasn't attacked by the Russians, by the Ukrainian missile. Stinger, he was attacked. There was some kind of problem with the engine and he just fell down. So that was the situation, and as a result of that, the Ukrainians first, they managed to destroy the Russians' helicopters that were protecting the entire, let's say, Russian air brigade, air, let's say, group in the sky. And as soon as the Russians lost their helicopters and lost the protection of those radio barriers, those 2 Su-34 and Su-35 became completely visible to the Ukrainian air defense system. And after that, there are also 2 options. Some of them are saying that those commandos, Ukrainian commandos, launched not just like missile against the helicopters, also they attacked those airplanes as well. And because though they wasn't protected anymore, they was destroyed easily by the Ukrainians, or the Ukrainian Stingers or something like this. Another version was that as soon as the Ukrainian commandos destroyed those helicopters, the Ukrainians sent their MiG-29 that were located in the Mirgorod air base closer to the border, and that was like upgraded MiG-29, upgraded by Poland, by the NATO countries. So he had a lot of modern rockets, missiles on board, and when as soon as the Russians lost the Mi-8 helicopters, that MiG-29 got as close as possible, and he launched their own missiles against Su-34, and then he launched his missile against, let's say, Su-35. and he destroyed both planes. And after that, he carefully and without any problem returned back to Mirgor, to his main base. So that was the situation. That was a very big tragedy for the Russian Air Forces. I believe and I expect that the Russians, as usual, are going to make some kind of action of revenge. If you remember the last time when the Ukrainians crossed the border with their commandos, after that the Russians made missile dagger or Iskander attack, and as a result of that attack, up to 200 NATO officers was buried under the ruins. So I expect that today we're going to see something like this. But for now, there are no changes. Nothing have happened. I believe that the Russians are trying to prepare plans, trying to understand what did happen, and they want to prevent such things in the future. Also, there is a video. This is the Su-34 aircraft that was shot down by the Ukrainian Stinger, or air-to-air missile. Now you're gonna see that he's flying down. He's not flying, and this is the explosion and so on. So this is the situation that took place in Bryansk area. Also, very interesting updates are coming from the western part of Ukraine. Today there was the greatest explosion of ammo depot on the territory of this town. You see, it's a very big explosion. It's munition, it was ammo depot, and as you can see, this ammo depot is located very far, very deep to the west. So probably the Ukrainians couldn't and this area should be protected, the Patriot air defense systems. And as we can see, the Russians also had some solution how to attack the Ukrainian ammo depots very deep inside the territory and without any problem, and to penetrate or bypass the Patriot's air defense system. This is also very interesting update, because as you can see one more time, this area is located very far to the west, very close even to the NATO countries, and the Ukrainians couldn't suppress and destroy those missiles or something like this. From the other side, the Ukrainians continue attacking with missiles Lugansk. At least during the previous 48 hours, the Ukrainians made 2 or 3 missiles attacks, and today there was the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, the Russian sources published a photo of confirmation that the Ukrainians used Storm Shadow missile that were supplied from United Kingdom. And this is a real escalation of the conflict between the United Kingdom and Russia, not between Ukraine and Russia. And most of the people expect that now it's turn from the Russian side to answer this situation. So we'll see whether the Russians are able to do anything or not, because everybody expects real steps from the Russian side. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that the Ukrainians were using also 2 aircrafts, but Su-24 and Su-27. Su-24 was attacking using missiles this area, and Su-27 was protected the Su-24. So the same tactics as the Russians used in Bryansk area. And also the Russians are saying that as a result of air defense work, they managed to shut down both these aircrafts. But the problem is that the Ministry of Defense reported about destroying of those aircrafts in the morning, during the morning report, and after that the Ukrainians made another launch of Storm Shadow missile. So probably that wasn't Storm Shadow, or the Ukrainians have so many air forces so they can lose them, and without being afraid of like losing entire air forces. I don't know, very difficult situation. Everything is very complicated. I understand that everybody lies, so we just need to understand who is giving us more truth than lie. So this is about the situation with these missiles and aircrafts. Now let's talk about the situation on the ground, and currently we are moving to Bakhmut, our famous Bakhmut. The Ukrainians continue their counter-offensive operation, and today the head of Wagner's Yevgeny Prigozhin published his own video. I believe you saw this video with the very big map where he was making some kind of drawings and so on. He was like a military summary, but like old military summary, let's say. I'm also like skinhead, so that's what we're like. So that was the situation, and he was explaining the situation, and he was talking mainly about the things that we were discussing in the past, that the Ukrainians first will try to he was saying that the Russian main tactics is to encircle the enemies and to make cauldrons, but the Ukrainians tactics is to split everything in small parts. And he he told us, the Prigozhin told us, that the first thing that Ukrainians are going to do is to develop their bridgehead in the vicinity of Dubovo-Vasilievka, in this area. And currently, as I understand, the Ukrainians continue pushing this area. And as we discussed yesterday in the previous video, you remember that this hill that located in this area is the highest position in this area, this one hill. So it's like 190 meters above the level of the sea, so it's a very top position, and the Russians and Prigozhin reported that from this position you can see every single square meter, not just in Berhovka but inside the Bakhmut as well. So currently the Ukrainians controls the most important tactical position according to Prigozhin, and from this position the Ukrainians are planning to navigate Ukrainian forces who are currently trying to attack the Russians in the Dubovo-Vasilievka in this area. So let's get some arrows to this map trying to show the destinations of the Ukrainian forces in this area of their attacks. So this is probably the Ukrainians' movements, and as we understand, the Russians, like 106 Air Assault Division, is the forces that are currently trying to protect the Wagner's flank. Meanwhile, the Wagners are continue pushing inside of Bakhmut. As you can see, in comparison with the previous day, there are a lot of updates, and even from this perspective, we understand and see that Wagner's controls around 30% of the citadel fortification. And today Prigozhin also told us that he was very sure, and I believed him, that soon Bakhmut is going to fall. There is no doubts about his words. And currently there are still fierce fightings in the Nest fortification in this area. The Wagners continue pushing in this area. I expect more updates from this area, because as you can see, the Wagners managed to achieve significant success in the northern part of the citadel by pushing to the south, like along these lines and something like this. Oh, sorry, not the wrong color. Yes, in this area. So this is a red line. This is the main Russian attacks in this area. And the Ukrainians are trying to stop the Russians, but we see that the Ukrainians don't have chances. Furthermore, the Russians, Wagner's, managed to penetrate the northwestern part of the western part of Bakhmut, and currently we can say that Wagner's entered the final fortification area, and now there's the clashes, let's say, on the final streets. And if the Russians are able to penetrate this area and capture this area within the next 24 hours, we can say that the battle for Bakhmut has ended. So we'll see. When talking about the south, as I understand, the situation has been stabilized. Yesterday we moved this 5th Air Assault Brigade and 80th Air Mobile Air Assault Brigade in this area as well to this area, but we still haven't received any reports about any progress in this area. So I understand that 72nd Mechanized Brigade managed to take themselves in their hands and to, let's say, to build their defense line, and currently they're working well and not allow the Ukrainians to complete development. And of course I believe that they have more, they believe themselves much more as soon as they understand that there is a Wagner's behind them in Klishchiivka. But when talking about the words of Prigozhin, he also reported that according to the Ukrainian plans, they will try to attack in direction of Klishchiivka, and this is obvious from his side. So it was like as must from the Ukrainian side. So we'll see whether they're able to do this or not. And as I understand, he expects that the Ukrainians are going to launch this attack from day to day. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 285 soldiers. Of course, it's 3 times less in comparison with the numbers that they provided us yesterday. If you remember, yesterday Ukrainians lost just on the Donbas front line around 900 soldiers, according to the Ministry of Defense. Of course, it's up to you to believe or not, and mainly I'm providing this information to analyze the immediate situation, and at least it's some kind of a flag you can follow trying to understand the real picture on the front lines. So that's it about the Bakhmut front line. We expect more updates this night, and the next morning, of course, as usually, a short update about the progress during the night, and I expect that there are going to be some updates during the upcoming night. Very interesting updates. Now we're going to move to the Russian sources map, because my map map. This one that I'm trying to use is not completed yet, just some parts of front lines, but I expect that within the next few weeks I will complete all the functionalities, and then the map is going to be, I will move in production. So for now, let's move to the Russian sources map, and Kupiansk front line has been activated. The Ministry of Defense reported that Ukrainians lost 170 soldiers during the previous 24 hours. This is the highest level of losses from the Ukrainian side since the beginning of the special military operation. So 170 soldiers, almost the same level as on the Donetsk, on the Donbas front line in Bakhmut and so on. So as we need to wait a little bit more. If it's just a number for one day, that probably maybe, if you remember, we discussed that these days the Ukrainians made some kind of regrouping. There was a lot of rumors about columns and convoys that were heading in direction of Belgrade and so on. Probably the Russians managed to discover, spot some convoys and to attack them. So that this is the reason of such a high losses from the Ukrainian side. We need to wait for tomorrow. If the level of losses tomorrow is going to be on the same level, that means that something is happening there. And after that, we will concentrate it in this area, we'll add more icons, and we will try to analyze what is going on in this area. The only from important is that Ukrainians, according to the Ministry of Defense, lost one Mi-8 helicopter in this area. So Liman, Kupiansk, Liman, the same level, the same situation, no progress, and the only thing, the important thing is that, one more time, according to Prigozhin, the Ukrainians, according to the plan of Ukrainians, according to Prigozhin, the Ukrainians will try to attack from Siversk along, like in direction of Nikolaevka, Sakovantseti, Razdolovka to the south in direction of Solidar. So according to him, the Ukrainians will make attempt to return control over this area, or at least the Ukrainians have such a plan, and it just depends on the circumstances whether they are able to complete this plan or not. Now we are going to Donetsk front line. There are no changes, just regular battles, and something tells me that everybody are freezed on the front lines, on the Donetsk, on Ugledar, Marinka, and everybody, let's say, hold their breath, trying to wait the results of Battle for Bakhmut, because as soon as Battle for Bakhmut ends, there are going to be more changes, new decisions, new solutions from both sides, and probably the Russians will also launch a number of offensives in the Avdiivka and so on. For now, there are no changes, just the regular numbers from the Ministry of Defense about the losses and so on, nothing interesting. The only thing that when talking about South Donetsk area is that the level of losses is also on the very big level. So we can say that starting from the 11th of May, the level of losses is 100 to 155 soldiers, so very big, almost the same as in Kupiansk, and almost the same as was on the Liman front line during the support operation, when the Russians were trying to support forces in Bakhmut by flank attack in direction of Liman. So very heavy losses from the Ukrainian side, and the question, there are no combats, like real close combats, just artillery duels, so probably this level of losses tell us that the Ukrainians have already moved the necessary number of forces to the combat line, and they're also ready to start, and they're also wait and expect the situation, how the situation in Bakhmut is going to be resolved. When talking about Kherson area, no changes. So this is about the situation on the ground. And before we finish, just a few more words about the case in Bryansk, about the case with Lugansk and so on. This is the pattern. This is the pattern that Ukrainians uses. If we are talking, the Russians and the Ukrainians have their own patterns in this special military operation. When talking about the Russians, their pattern is, as we discussed in the previous videos, if you have a possibility to choose between manpower and the ground, the Russians always choose the manpower. They don't care about ground. They can capture small village, not even a village, a small building like a Mons, but if the Ukrainians launches counter-offensive operation, they will step back immediately, but one purpose, not to lose manpower. So this is the main pattern of the Russians. And when talking about the Ukrainians, their main pattern, before anything huge, before anything very big, they're always making a very powerful media campaign. If you remember the previous year, right before the beginning of the greatest Ukrainian counter-offensive operation in Kherson and Kharkiv, the Ukrainians killed Daria Dugina in Moscow, their special forces. The Ukrainians destroyed, let's go to the western, the Ukrainians destroyed the Crimea bridge. They killed Daria Dugina. If you remember, there was a failed attempt from the Ukrainian side to cross the Dnipro River and to capture Energodar. That was the only operation that failed. So there were a number of big and very loud media operations from the Ukrainian side, and most of them were successful. Just the only exception is Energodar operation. And today we see the same situation. There is a very big media victory, and not just media victory, just very big victory of special operation in Bryansk area. The Ukrainians continue bombing Lugansk with the Storm Shadow rocket. I expect more operations on the ground. I believe that the most tasteful piece of cake is, of course, to somehow to capture and to get Prigozhin. I believe that Prigozhin understands this. I think that they are not able to do this, but anyway, we see a number of very loud media victories, and right after them, the Ukrainians will launch their offensive operation. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to our channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.